Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya, and welcome to another episode of TFR Let's Talk. Today we have with us Krishna Vishnubhotla, VP of Product Strategy at Zimperium. Krishna, it's great to have you on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Swapnil. Looking forward to the conversation.
I am excited for today's discussion. It's mostly going to be around your 2024 Global Mobile Threat Report. But before we talk about the report, I would love to know a bit about the company itself. What do you folks do?
So Zimperium is really known for two things, right? One, we protect mobile devices accessing the enterprise. So think of it as securing the access for the employees. Two, we help you build, if you're in business, secure, compliant, and resilient mobile applications, right? So really, that's why we call ourselves a mobile security company, because we help with device security and app security.
A lot of things have changed in the last 10, 20 years, especially in the terms of security. Security used to be someone else's problem. It was an afterthought. It used to break the flow of developers. Developers don't like to talk to security folks because they're like, you'll slow me down. You may even, totally postpone the project I'm working on. But now things have changed. Security has become a priority. It has become a board level discussion. CISOs are there. We are also looking at a lot of cultural changes, the whole DevSecOps movement, the whole zero trust movement. And we are also seeing tools which are also focusing more on helping developers work more like a guardrail versus gates to create a safe place where developers can work on. So I now see that security is becoming an enabler. You create a safe spot and then you can innovate within that. How have you seen security evolve over years, and how has Zimperium also evolved with this changing time?
I think a lot has changed, like you said, right? Even just in the world of mobile, if you remember, the first iPhone versus what you have in our pocket is fundamentally different, right? And also, if you think of mobile apps, which has really driven the mobile revolution, the apps before used to do one thing and one thing really well when they came out, right? We were super excited about it. But now, if you see the majority of the apps that we use every day, these are almost become super apps, right? Because they do three things, right? They all combine collaboration, communication, and commerce to some extent. And that's where the value is coming from. But at the same time, when enterprises embrace, whether it's mobile devices, access, or mobile apps, I think two things have happened, right? One, they've realized inheriting or investing in mobile means, one, you've inherited a ton of internal complexity with respect to security and performance. Two, you're also looking at a ton of external threats that now you need to mitigate from, right? And this conversation, like you said, which used to be an aftermath, I think we've realized that we can't leave it to the end. It can't be a gating mechanism. It has to be part of our DNA. So the number one thing that we are trying to help with is awareness, right? Like you said, I used to be a developer a long time ago, worked in QA a long time ago, and developers are not a big fan of security because of the amount of friction it introduces, right? There's so many tools, it slows me down. They're not incentivized for security, right? They're incentivized to build cool things. That's what they like to do. So one of the things we've started with on the developer side is, one, understand, give you visibility into how much security do you really need. And I think this is a big, big factor in how security is perceived. Because if you think about how this is done, developers, when I ask them, so how do you know what to secure? They start quoting things like MASVS, OWASP, MITRE, right? It's a standards conversation, but that's great, but it's academic, right? What we want to help them with is to say, it's a great start looking at standards, but you need to get to a point where you need to understand what's really impacting you, right? What threats should you specifically worry about? And when we help them with that level of clarity, then security decisions become informed and simpler, right? You don't need all the security in the world. You just need to protect your crown jewels. So security needs to be aligned with risk. And that's where we're adding a ton of value, especially in the development org community.
Thank you so much. And you rightly said, I run a show called CISO Insight with Steve Winterfeld from Akamai. And he says, you can't protect what you can't see. So visibility is really important. I'm also seeing a lot of shift is also happening from pre-event to post-event. That's something, you can prepare as much as you want for something that may not go wrong, but what do you do when something does happen? So a lot of shifts are happening. So I'm really happy to talk to you and also just get a pulse on specifically mobile. So your report is also very well timed. So talk a bit about when your teams are working on this global mobile threat report. What are some of the key findings? Now, when we look at these findings, I look at it from two different lenses. One is that there are certain things that based on the patterns that you were expecting, that hey, this is what is happening, and then there are certain things even you were not expecting, even you got the shock and surprise. Oh, that's also happening. So I would love to know these two contrasts there, and then of course from there we'll deep dive into more details about what's going on in the mobile space.
Yeah. So if you think about why we publish this every year, right? It's because of one key thing. I think when it comes to mobile security, there are a lot of myths that we carry, right, across the organization, right? Whether it's a security leader or a development leader, over time we have a lot of myths about how this works, right? And the report really tries to help security leaders and development leaders understand that the risks with mobile are really come from three big buckets, if you think about it, right? One, there's the platform itself, right? iOS and Android. And the question is not whether one is more secure than the other. The question we want them to ask is secure from what, right? How are they evolving and what does that mean to you? Two, apps, right? Without the apps, the mobile device is pretty useless if you think about it, right? The apps is what drive a ton of value from that platform. But there are apps that an enterprise develops, there's apps that someone else you procure from another organization, what we call third-party apps, and then you have apps that me as an end user downloads. All of these result in a mobile footprint that's unique from anybody else on the planet, right? And the third aspect of this is just cyber hygiene on mobile, right? Think about all the things we do on our personal devices. I travel a lot, right? I click on links from my friends, right? I open emails, I connect to airport Wi-Fi because I need the connectivity, right? So today, convenience trumps security on mobile, right? We see that often. But really, the report is trying to take these three concepts and help enterprises understand how this impacts their enterprise risk, right? And where do you get started, right? I think that's the question we get all the time is if you go and Google mobile security risks, you get overwhelmed. And a lot of security and development leaders are saying, where do we start? Give us a starting point that allows us to move forward and action on something. And that's what the report is really about.
Can you also talk about the new kind of threats? We talked about phishing, then you start talking about mishing. What are these, and what is either working or not working, for bad actors or good actors when it comes to new kind of threats?
So the one thing to understand about bad actors is they're extremely financially motivated, right? So the things they go after have a monetization model behind them, right? So credentials are a big deal, right? You can sell them to multiple parties. There's a huge monetization model behind it. And this is known fact. When it comes to phishing, right? What's fundamentally makes it different on mobile is just mobile as a platform is so much more conducive to phishing, right? Think about it. I open 50 to 60% at a minimum of emails on my mobile phone every day, even though I can open them on my Mac, right? It's convenient and it's my pocket. But on mobile, when I open an email, when I open a link, when I click on a website, it's very hard for me to actually see the name of the URL, right? Where is the site that I'm going to? It redirects me a couple of times. It's hard for me to follow, right? So for a bad actor, trying to convince me that they're legitimate and get me to offer up my credentials is a lot easier than a traditional Mac or a laptop where you can actually see the URL in the browser, you notice the redirects and things like that. And on mobile, the thing that we normally forget is we think phishing is all coming from email, but that's not where we click most of our links, right? I have 6 messaging apps that I click on links on. I have social media apps click on. I get SMSs from my friends. And not to forget the amount of QR codes I scan when I'm traveling, whether it's restaurants, airports, outside. So the number of ways you can trick someone on a mobile device and convince them to give up something sensitive is tremendous. And the probability is also really, really high on mobile. And that's why we say mishing, because it's not your traditional phishing, right? On mobile, the probability of you falling a victim is much, much higher.
What are the specific industries that you target? Because some industry, for example, financial or healthcare, they have, they're very regulated industries. So the way you deal with them is a bit different. So just talk about the use cases that you target.
Yeah, so some of the biggest use cases obviously are in finance, right? Because there's money involved, there's identity involved, right? So we do a lot of business in financial services because there the concern is we bank on our phone today, right? And fraud is a big concern. And the thing with financial services is it's not just the dollars lost in a fraudulent transaction, it's also the costs to the bank when fraud occurs, which is probably 3 times the money that's actually lost, right? So there's a lot of sensitivity to fraud, and we help a lot of these banks proactively mitigate mobile fraud, right? And obviously, if I can take over your bank account, I also know, you kind of lost your identity for the most part, right? Because you can get a lot of details, synthetic identities, and then these come back and bite the bank again via things like digital account opening. Now, the other areas where we're really helping is think about copyright content, right? How much of copyright content do we view on your phone, right? I have 6 subscriptions. Think of Netflix, Prime, Paramount. I'm a big soccer fan. So there's a lot of copyright content that also needs to be protected on your device, and we're helping there. The other big area that we're starting to see mobile security, obviously, is access. Now, BYO, if you think about not just apps and you go to devices, right? I mean, 80% of businesses have moved to some form of BYO, or bring your own device policy, right? Whether it's via corporate liable phones or individual liable phones, they're allowing a lot of these devices to connect to the enterprise. And when you start this journey, right, businesses have to choose between a MAM and MDM and some kind of VDI and so on and so forth. And it becomes a difficult decision. It's not very clear. So the other place we really help businesses with our mobile threat defense solution is for them to understand you have to make sure whatever security that you deploy, right, actually works on all these devices, like works on compromised devices. You can't be that you build security, you have a MAM or MDM, and if your phone gets compromised, that all these security things you have in place don't work, right? So we're kind of bolstering that secure access via a mobile threat defense solution, irrespective of what management tool that you pick, which is really important, right? So those are the 3 big ones. Now, to talk about healthcare is very interesting because, like you said, you have HIPAA and HITRUST, which has been around for a long time. But one of the things that we see in healthcare, one, phishing is rampant on healthcare. And it makes sense if you think about it, right? It's such a complicated supply chain. Most people don't even understand how many of the middlemen have their information, right? And it's extremely interesting when you start following that thread. So if you're a bad actor, you can target any one of the targets in that, right? So many people in that supply chain. So it's an obvious choice. Why phishing? You can cast a wide net, try to get their credentials, and then you're in. The other thing we see with phishing is right now, just the ransomware attacks alone this year, right? Traditional ransomware, I think everyone in healthcare is making sure their traditional infrastructure is secure. But one of the things we're seeing slowly ramp up is when we do our malware analysis, we're seeing a lot of ransomware type code within these malware. So malware authors are warming up to ransomware via mobile. And these are nothing but mobile apps that have a ransomware element to it, the ability to encrypt information. So that wave is absolutely coming. And we see now healthcare companies are focused on traditional infrastructure, but in the near future, a lot of this ransomware conversation will come to mobile. And that's what we're getting ready for.
When we look at some of these threats, can you talk about the role that Zimperium is playing there? How do you enable teams to kind of build a very secure posture when it comes to mobile threat?
Secure posture, we think about it in two ways, right? One, if you are giving access to your enterprise assets on an employee's mobile device, right? In that sense, a secure posture is quite simple to us, right? It is, you're entitled to a certain amount of access. But if you really want zero trust, you need a way to ensure before that person is accessing the enterprise that his phone is still safe, right? You need a way of testing that device on demand, right? And that's really where we come in. Right? You could have given entitlement via a MAM, an MDM, a VDI, or whatnot. But before or just before they're accessing that sensitive asset in your enterprise, you want to check that his device is safe. If it's not, then entitlement doesn't matter, right? Why would you ever give someone access on a compromised device? And that's the question we're helping. And that is at the core of how we think about security posture for a device. Now, if you come on the mobile app side, it's quite similar if you think about it, right? You made a great point. You can plan for security when you're building the app, but once you release the app, there are so many things out of your control. So when you build an app, this is not just about the external threat, right? Like I mentioned before, one, mobile apps today in a business context are as much about operational sustainability and cyber resilience as much as it is about preventing the bad actor from getting in, right? So for mobile apps, the question we are asking enterprises is, once you release your mobile application, whether you put it on the store and when it runs on the device, can it protect itself, right? Can it protect itself from somebody downloading it from the store, reverse engineering it, and then finding ways to exploit it? Or can you prevent it from malware on the device, abusing your app, or your data getting lost on a poor Wi-Fi that they connected to? But this notion of you need to build self-defending applications, because to your point, you're not in control of all the elements. That's how we think about security posture when it comes to mobile apps. And then we help them during development kind of put in the right security pieces that allow for that, right? And obviously we do this without degrading performance to an extent where it's unacceptable, because security comes at a cost. We've helped them find that balance between security and performance in that process.
Since we're talking about process, I also want to understand a bit of the as we talked about it, cultural aspect. The fact is, I don't want to go too much detail, but the fact is that you can bring a horse to the lake, but you cannot make the horse drink. Unless the right mindset is there. Now, when it comes to culture, I don't see it as tool versus culture. Sometimes tools, if you don't have the right cultures, no matter what tools I give it to you, that's like I can bring you to the lake, you won't drink it. But sometimes tools can also bring a change. They become catalyst to bring that cultural change. So can you also talk about how do you folks enable teams to bring that cultural change through your tools, through the processes that is needed to once again improve their security posture?
So let's talk about the development side of things first, right? Because I think, most of the enterprises we deal with have invested a significant amount of time and resources in building app development teams and the tools and process that you talk about. in that place, if you think about what culture comes down to, and especially with agile teams, right? It's a cross-functional team. A big part of culture is helping the app developer and the AppSec person understand what they're doing, right? And a big part of that is, we have a lot of secure code training. I remember me going through a lot of secure coding training to write better code. But the problem there is I was learning how to write better code, but I wasn't learning what the threat model was for that app, right? That was the part that was missing. So I couldn't write the best code possible. So in that sense, we're actually helping mobile app development teams with some of our solutions to say, look, you're already learning to write secure code, which is a fantastic first step. But here's the other part of that equation is, here's the threat model for your application, right? So that you understand where you need to write secure code. What are the functions you really need to protect and why? So that they feel empowered to write better code and also choose where you want to place security, right? That's the big rub in mobile app development is I understand how to write code, but tell me where security is most critical and then I will make it work. So the second part of that education is really what we're bringing through our solutioning. Now, if you look at the other side of the equation around zero trust access and access on mobile devices, which is typically some form of a mobility and security function, they're asking the same question. They say, we have an MDM and a MAM, and we've figured out how to provision mobile devices. But what we don't know is when we should pull it back or disable that access without making your phone completely dead or wiping your phone, right? Nobody wants to do that. So for the mobility admins and the security admins on the device side, we're helping them truly understand what risk-based access looks like, right? What should you do when you see malware on the device? What should you do when you see a non-compliant app on the device? How do you think about these things? How do you put policies in place? So for both these teams, really impacting culture means empowering them, and visibility and the right tooling is a big part of how we help them think through the right security for their organization.
What message, or of course, we don't have time to share a whole playbook, but what advice you have for security team, for CISOs, to learn from these findings and once again build a proper culture and processes within their teams?
Yeah, so for any CISO or a CTO who's invested in mobile, right, whether it's mobile devices, apps, I think it's evident that you're dealing with like a two-headed dragon, right? And at some point, you have to address the risks on the device side and you have to address risks on the app side. Most important for any leader addressing security is one, visibility. You have to understand what you're up against. What are you up against when you give access to someone on a mobile device, whether it's BYOD or not? Two, on mobile apps, what are the risks you are taking on when you build mobile applications or when you buy third-party apps? Start with visibility and then move to understanding the threat model and then make informed decisions around security, right? I think that's what I would recommend.
One more thing I will ask is that, of course, the things are changing during COVID time. Work from home, remote work became quite popular, which also led to a lot of bring your own devices. Now companies are forcing employees to go back to office, Amazon also, but there are still a lot of folks, a lot of, even in the public sector, and private sector, folks are working remotely. What kind of unique challenge, security related challenge, bringing your own devices pose? Because sometimes folks, even if they are using VPNs and something, they use the same device for their personal work as well as the office job, which kind of blurs the line. You may end up clicking on a link that you're not supposed to click. So talk a bit about what kind of risk they pose and what Zimperium does to kind of protect some of these use cases.
A lot of organizations, as you said, are asking employees to come back, right? Which for the most part there's a concern around productivity and so on and so forth. But I think COVID has fundamentally changed how we consume information, right? And that's not going to change. We anticipate more and more mobile apps will continue to access the enterprise, right? Most enterprises are converting their web apps into mobile apps to deploy, even for operational flexibility, right? I mean, if you think of things like airlines, right? Look at the amount of apps and devices they have outside, right? A lot of these apps will continue onto devices that will continue to get deployed through the enterprise because it just makes operational sense, right? So that trend will continue, which means enterprises will have to think about protecting these endpoints, whether they're mobile or the phone. On the other side, I see more and more enterprises buying third-party mobile applications for productivity, right? Think about it. Zimperium is a small company, but we have Slack on my phone. I have Concur, I have Expensify, I have Salesforce. So the number of business productivity apps is constantly rising every year. And that will continue to rise because it just makes sense from a productivity standpoint. So enterprises will have to continue to vet the applications they build and they buy because they're acting on their enterprise data, right? So we see those two trends continuing, and we intend to build and enhance our solutions to help enterprises on both these aspects.
Krishna, thank you so much for joining me today. Talk about this report and also talk about the whole security landscape in the mobile space. Thanks for great insights, and I would love to have you back on the show. Thank you.
Love it. Thanks, Swapnil. Appreciate the opportunity.